It's time for the Ride or Dynasty podcast. Let's go! Welcome to the Ride or Dynasty podcast with Ryan Bickerstaff, JJ Wenner, and your host, Michael Kloss.
JJ, I think this is finally the show. The show where we talk about one singular item on everyone's mind. The show where we answer the biggest question in pro football. Everyone loves an inside joke, and now it's time to share it. Today we talk about why do these players hit so darn hard?
Amen.
Now, that was a shout out to your wife, Michelle Wenner. Really quickly to start this off, I've got to get the story behind this. Do you think that she's going to listen and hear us talk about her favorite topic?
Yeah, she'll listen for the first 2 minutes while we're saying this, and then smile and go on with her life. But my wife loves football. Especially her hometown Patriots, which goes over very well in my house. However, when she watches a game, she cringes every time there's a hard hit or whenever a player stays down after a play because she's a mother and she cares about them. So whenever we would discuss the upcoming podcast, she would always ask me if we were going to discuss her favorite topic. Why do the players have to hit each other so hard? So every week I tell her we're going to talk about it. And then when she asks me how it went, I said we didn't get to it. But this week, honey, we got to it.
That's right. And they hit so hard because it's fun. Now, of course, this is the Ride or Dynasty podcast. I'm your host, Michael Kloss. We're just having way too much fun with inside jokes here as we kick this show off. Today we're talking tight end rankings. You heard it from five-star husband JJ Wenner. We're also joined by Ryan Bickerstaff tonight. How are you this evening, Ryan?
I'm feeling a little uneasy about my semi-heavy investment in Colts players for my fantasy teams this offseason.
I can understand that. It's going to get a little dicey coming up, too. Also, is certified athletic trainer Nick Mirabito also with us. We've got a lot to cover with you tonight, Nick. Are you ready?
Well, Michael, I was thinking about holding out, but I finally got my hands on a Shut Air Advantage helmet that was so I guess I'm going to be good to go.
Yeah, you better not. You better reconsider. That you wrote with JJ.
That's right. That's right.
Exactly. So today on the show, we're going to be talking tight end rankings. We have my new favorite segment, Nicked Up with Nick Mirabito.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Little Flavor Flav. I need my hype, man. We'll check in with him in a few minutes, and he'll dish on the injuries and recovery of players you need to know about. But first, let's get to the news desk.
Yes, please. There are so many reports coming out of Dallas training camp. It's fun to pick and choose, but we're going to talk about Dak Prescott and whether they're bogus or not, with questions about who are leaking these reports. Supposedly Dak Prescott, in the midst of trying to get a contract, is seeking $40 million. He might have turned down a $30 million contract. Let me ask you, Ryan, how do you see the Cowboys working this out with deals to play what you would think would be their top three offensive players?
Michael, I'm really not sure how the Cowboys are going to perform the accounting gymnastics it's going to require to pay all the players Dallas needs to compete for Super Bowls. The salary cap this year is $188 million. That number increases to $200 next year, and Dak wants $40 million of that. Zeke wants to be the highest paid running back, and Amari Cooper's contract will put him among the top paid receivers in the league. And then there are 50 other guys who need to get paid. Jalen Smith's coming up. Leighton Vander Esch won't be far behind. Byron Jones deserves a contract. They just paid DeMarcus Lawrence, too, and they're already paying one of the NFL's most expensive offensive lines. So the thing about Dak, Carson Wentz just got $32 million in Philly. If I'm Dallas...
They deserved every penny.
So if I'm Dallas, I'm offering Dak $33 million, but I will not go above 35. I just can't pay him more than Russell Wilson. I can't. Dak doesn't have a Super Bowl ring yet, and he isn't a top 5 quarterback. But it is very hard to find franchise quarterbacks, so they are going to have to meet somewhere in the middle. In order to sign him, for Zeke, he's too good to trade or let walk. Pay the man his money. Dak and Zeke go together. They're peanut butter and jelly. They belong together. And as far as Amari Cooper is concerned, I like Cooper, but I need to see some consistency out of him before I'm willing to pay him like big time money. And if that means I have to franchise tag him for a year, so be it. Moving along now to Miami, Dolphins running back Kenyon Drake is in a walking boot and could miss the rest of the preseason. Are we worried about his fantasy value going forward?
I'll pick this one up with an assist here from Nick if you want. He says it's nothing crazy, right? Brian Flores says it could, quote unquote, be a while, but hopefully he'll be ready for the season. I was penciling him in as a top 15 back, and I am I don't know if I'm ready to walk back on that, but it is certainly making me nervous. Nick, is there what even is the injury? Do we know?
Yeah, right now we don't know. They haven't released an official, what exactly the injury is. So there's really no way to know. But this does maybe open the door for Kalen Ballage, because if you're not available, it's going to be really tough to keep getting those reps.
Makes sense. JJ, you want to hit us with maybe some quick hits of news?
Yeah, just a couple of quick things that popped up today. Emmanuel Sanders of the Broncos is on track to start week 1. Making a very fast recovery from his injury last year. Jimmy G threw 5 straight interceptions at practice today, which is pretty horrendous. Pretty Nathan Peterson-like. Odell Beckham missed practice with a hamstring pointer? I don't even know what that is, but I'm sure Nordic hamstring curl would help. Case Keenum and Josh Rosen are both starting to lead the QB race for their respective teams. And that's it.
Yeah, I think it was hip pointer with Odell.
Hamstring pointer does not exist. Hip pointer, for sure.
Are you sure?
Yeah, 100% positive.
I'm pretty sure I have a hamstring pointer right now.
I'm not sure Nathan Peterson exists either.
What is it, Peterson?
No, he said Peterman.
He said Peterson. It is Peterman. Yeah, that guy still haunts my dreams.
I heard Peterman, so I'm going with it. Anyways, segue, at least I'm making it that way, to get into our segment, Nicked Up with Nick Mirabito. Now, I'm going to dive right in, Nick. So, Ryan alluded to it earlier. There's concerning news out of Colts camp. Andrew Luck hasn't seen much of the field this training camp. We've heard different reports, I feel like almost every day, with it was a calf strain, a high ankle issue, and now a, quote, little bone issue. Can you take us through the smoke and let us know what's going on here with Andrew Luck?
Yeah, look, this whole thing stinks. Last night, Colts GM Chris Ballard had a conference call with beat reporters, which I listened to today, which, by the way, is just awful. They're all on speaker. They all talk over each other. It's brutal listen. But basically, to summarize everything that he said, it started as a calf strain back in March. They had an MRI that confirmed it was a calf strain. Okay, and then as we got into training camp, he started to complain of pain more in the ankle area as opposed to the calf. So they're clearly very different areas. They started to treat it as a calf injury, but it wasn't getting any better. So a few days ago, they sent him to a specialist to come up with a concrete diagnosis. Now, that little bone issue yesterday, that quote was said by owner Jim Irsay. He was talking about this thing called the osteogonum, which is technically like a small projection on one of the bones that makes up the ankle joint. Well, on the conference call, Chris Ballard said that Irsay misspoke and that the osteogonum syndrome was part of the differential diagnosis, which is basically, a list of things that a medical team comes up with that could be the issue before they start to rule things out. So according to Ballard, that was ruled out by the specialist through the use of an injection that kind of numbs the area. Pain doesn't go away, so they start to look elsewhere. Now, Chris Ballard says that the Colts finally believe they have the correct diagnosis of that high ankle issue, and that they can proceed with confidence that it can be corrected with rehab and won't need surgery. But he wouldn't go as far as saying that he would be ready for week 1.
So, do you see this as something that could linger into the season? It's been reported that he's not going to play in the preseason at all.
As far as preseason, Chris Ballard said that they were going to limit his action anyway. But because there's such a moving target here from calf to ankle, it's impossible for me not to be concerned, right? So I know they claim to finally have a diagnosis, which is good, but this has been an ongoing issue, and it pains me to say this because I love Andrew Luck. I just think he's a good human being. But at this point, you have to be concerned for his status at the start of the season. So, with that being said, JJ, I'm going to shoot this over to you. How do you see this affecting the Colts' playmakers on offense, number one? And number two, do you see anything, any value with Jacoby Brissett if Luck misses time?
Well, obviously, Luck not starting would have a tremendous effect on all the Colts position players for this season. But in Dynasty, you aren't going to really bump them down too much. And you're not going to start trading people if he's only going to be out a few weeks. Brissett is an interesting player to roster, especially in Superflex or 2 QB leagues. He may have a shot to start somewhere else next season. However, if you're in redraft or 1 QB, he really has zero value. Now, just one other point. So you said that the calf and ankle aren't really, they don't share any.
So
correct?
Obviously, they're in the same type of area, but the two injuries that they're describing seem very distinct and different. And Chris Ballard said last night in his conference call that they don't believe that they're connected.
Is there a possibility that Andrew Luck has cankles?
That is very possible. I'll tell you what, I'll do some digging, and next week I'll get back to you on that one.
Because it might be a cankle pointer.
A cankle pointer, yeah, no. Oh, you know what? I'll tell you what.
And you might actually it might be named after you, the Nick Mirabito Syndrome.
There it is. Book it. I love it. I've always wanted a syndrome, so that's perfect.
I've always wanted a syndrome. Nice.
All right, so to keep it rolling and back to Dallas, Amari Cooper is dealing with plantar fasciitis.
Yeah, say that 5 times fast.
Man, why do you guys give me these hard words? That's caused him to miss the last 6 practices. Now, Amari Cooper is not a good player. And Jason Garrett said yesterday that he's making progress, and we're certainly not going to rush him back. He's getting closer and closer. He's working on the side, so we don't think this is a long-term thing. But we just want to be deliberate in bringing him back. Nick, what's going on? How do you view this news?
Yeah, so plantar fasciitis is a pretty painful injury. It hurts a lot, and the prognosis really depends on the severity. So the plantar fascia is this thick connective tissue that runs along the bottom of the foot, and it can severely limit a player's ability to push off. And it's really tricky because if it's not managed correctly, it can continue to linger from that constant stretching every time a player goes to push off when he's running, which perpetuates that inflammation and keeps the pain there. Right now, the Cowboys obviously seem confident. You read that Jason Garrett quote there. We're still a few weeks away from the start of the season, so I wouldn't panic yet because it still has some time to heal. However, if it gets closer and he's still dealing with this still missing practice, you should prepare yourself for a slow start for Amari Cooper. But it is something that can be managed during the season, but it's definitely going to hamper him a little bit if it lingers.
Now, I know it's not one of those injuries that necessarily heals and goes away, that if he doesn't rest it enough, he may strain it again and suffer more injury to it?
Yeah, correct. So it can, until it is completely ruptured, it can continue to cause pain if you don't let it heal. Actually, I've read cases where players actually, from a pain perspective, prefer it to have completely ruptured. So, it'll rupture, and then after, whatever amount of time, the pain goes away, and they're not constantly stretching it if it's completely ruptured. Whereas if it's still intact, you still have that issue. Obviously, it's not good from a structural standpoint. There's physics come into play, absorbing of forces. I won't get into that. But, it is something that if not rested properly and not treated properly, can linger.
JJ's in a good mood tonight. I can tell when he starts going full Donald Trump, I get super excited. Amari Cooper, not a good player. What a loser. Just sneaking that right in. I appreciate that. I actually really like it.
All right, I'm done. I'm done.
Get out of here. Your wife is so angry with you right now. All right. I know I want to talk about Trey Burton, but I'm going to rotate a little bit. We'll get to that in our tight end previews. Nick, tell me about Derrius Guice. As of yesterday, which was August the 13th, he was not cleared to play yet. I'm kind of starting to get nervous over here. Should I be nervous here, Nick?
Yeah, so like you said, he hasn't been cleared for contact yet. And just to be clear, this was not a setback or anything. So over the last couple of podcasts, I'm sure you guys have heard me talk about how there's always a progression back to full activity, right? And right now it seems like he's at the point right before being cleared for contact. He's doing sports-specific activities. He's participating in everything at training camp except for live hitting sessions, which is good. It's still something to monitor. I talked about this before, how it was kind of complicated. He had an infection at one point, but just because he hasn't been cleared yet doesn't mean he won't be fully cleared soon, because he is, like I said, at that pre-clear kind of area there. And I think we can expect Washington to maybe start him a little slow, but as the season starts to go on, as long as he responds well, he could take over that backfield and make a really big impact for them and for fantasy owners.
Nick, one last thing about Washington. Ryan had actually brought up talking about Trent Williams prior to the show. And although he doesn't really have a fantasy impact, I think talking about Washington and their medical staff in general is something that has come up with Trent Williams, that he has no faith in that training staff as a whole. We saw with Alex Smith and Derrius Guice that they had these infections. I know Tampa Bay a few years back, everybody got staph infections. It was like an Oprah show, but negative.
Yeah.
So what's going on with the Washington? I mean, I know you don't know, but why are all these people upset with the Washington?
Yeah, look, obviously, I'm not in there, so I don't see the day-to-day. I actually know the head team physician. I know who she is. She used to work at UPMC when I was in Pittsburgh. I forget her name, but I know she worked there. Look, sometimes players just lose trust in the people that are taking care of them. It's hard for someone from the outside to call a medical staff incompetent when you don't see the day-to-day, when you see things like last year. I mean, they did a pretty good job of keeping Adrian Peterson on the field. He's certainly not an easy task, so some of these things happen, and it just happens. It is what it is.
That's the special kind of insight that we can and have grown to expect from Nick week to week. That was Nicked Up with Nick Mirabito. Yeah! All right, so we're going to let that roast a little bit. I was really excited, but it is now time for our main event. We're talking tight end rankings.
And just like we do for quarterbacks, running backs, receivers, we're breaking down our consensus tight end rankings. We're going to break down the top 24. And by the way, if you want to circle back and listen to those previous rankings episodes, hit us up on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, our website, riderdynasty.com, or on Twitter at riderdynasty.
And remember, we're looking at a 3-year window with these rankings. This is the only way to play Dynasty, in our opinion. A 3-year window is ideal, and while you want to think long-term, a lot can happen after 3 years.
So let's get to it. We're going to get right into the top 24. We'll highlight any disparities and try to settle any ties that we come across with some good old-fashioned debate. So, JJ, you want to get us started with numero uno?
Absolutely. Number 1 is Travis Kelce, who was our consensus pick. Over Kelce's career, he has averaged 116 targets, 82 receptions, 1,050 yards, and 6 touchdowns a season. He has the same offense back, maybe with an added weapon in Hardman. He will be Mahomes' number 1 target in a pass-happy offense. They win a lot. He's 29 and rarely misses time. An easy consensus pick for our number 1 Dynasty tight end. Following him, we have number 2, George Kittle. Now, Kittle had 88 receptions for 1,377 yards last year and 5 TDs, and he finished as the tight end 2 behind Kelce last year. Now, although I ranked him number 2, I am a bit worried about him replicating that production this year.
Sure.
For 3 reasons. 1, he has played 9 games with Jimmy Garoppolo. his extrapolated stats for a full season with Jimmy G would put him at 72 targets, 50 receptions, 762 yards, and 3.5 TDs.
You're saying not the number 2 tight end here.
Correct. That would put him behind Trey Burton last season. Number 2, there is a much greater competition for targets on a team that only had 532 total targets in 2018. Last season, Kittle received 25.5% of the total targets. The 49ers added wide receivers Deebo Samuel and Jalen Hurd in the second and third round, respectively. They traded for Tevin Coleman. They still have Pettis, Kendrick Bourne, Goodwin, Matt Breida, and Juszczyk, who gets a lot of targets. So there's going to be a lot of competition, and I don't know if he's going to replicate it. Number 3, his great season equaled a 4-12 record. Do we expect the same plan will suddenly have different results, right? Isn't that the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing and expecting different results? Shanahan is a smart coach, and he's going to tweak his game plan to try to win more games. Now, overall, I am not saying to not draft George Kittle. Draft him, but be wary and don't reach on him.
Yeah, absolutely. Completely agree, JJ. And I'm going to talk about number 3 here, rounding out the big 3 at tight end. We have Zach Ertz, one of my personal favorites. Zach Ertz is one of those guys that's really good at football. Breaking news, right? We could have talked about that in the beginning.
He's making jokes. All right.
I thought I was going to be the only one to laugh. Felt really awkward there for a second.
It's good. I routinely make jokes, and nobody laughs.
So, last year he set a record for receptions by a tight end with 116 receptions in that season. He was 3rd in yards, 3rd in touchdowns for a tight end. And it really doesn't matter who's under center because Zach Ertz always gets open. He's a great route runner and is arguably the best in the league at creating leverage in man-to-man and finding spots in zones. Ertz had a target share of 26.4% when Wentz was under center and 24.4% with Foles. So when you're drafting Zach Ertz, I don't think you need to worry about who the quarterback is. He's always going to be open. I personally have him at number 3, and that's not because I think he's the 3rd tight end from a talent perspective. It's just because the Eagles have a ton of weapons. They added Deshaun Jackson and J.J. Arcega-Whiteside to the wide receiver core, and we've seen Dallas Goedert start to emerge as another tight end threat. And we'll talk about Dallas Goedert in a little bit, but look, despite all these weapons, Ertz is still the most talented pass catcher on the Eagles, Wentz's favorite target, so you should continue to see big things from him.
So we really didn't organize the tight ends into tiers, but essentially if we did, I think that we're all agreed that that's tier 1, right?
I would disagree. George Kittle and Travis Kelce are clearly the tier 1. Ooh. Zach Ertz and Evan Ingram are only 0.3 apart.
See, I would say Kelce is his own tier, and then Ertz and Kittle could kind of go back and forth there. But I see what you're talking about, at least from a consensus standpoint.
Dang, that was just supposed to be a throwaway line. You were all supposed to agree with me. Absolutely. I was hoping to fish in for a while. And I didn't do that.
Absolutely, Michael.
Well, then let's go into number 4, and we're going to talk about Evan Ingram. I am really excited at the prospect of watching Ingram in this offense this year. Now, a lot of people aren't excited about the Giants, but think about it. Golden Tate suspended the first 4 games. I think Daniel Jones is going to look to Ingram as the primary receiver. Yes, I did say Daniel Jones, not a certain Eli Manning. In the last 2 seasons, Ingram was top 5 in PPR points per game, just coming under, it was George Kittle and Gronk, who's 3rd on that list, obviously no longer in the NFL there. He was 7th in yards per game among tight ends last year. Now, while that stat might not be the most telling in the world, he did miss 5 games, right? So the name of this season, this game, and doing all that on that offense was volume, right? Shepard's dinged up, Beckham's gone, Tate's suspended, Coleman is out for the season too. So I think that Ingram is going to feast this year and even for years to come unless they start really addressing the team. But at that point, he's established. So Evan Ingram is our number 4 consensus tight end.
At number 5, we have the real number 4 tight end, which is O.J. Howard. Howard was on pace for 54 receptions, 904 yards, and 8 touchdowns last season before getting hurt. That stat line would have given him 192.4 PPR fantasy points, which would have placed him as the tight end 6. He tied for 5th in fantasy points per game at 12.1, and at only 24 years old, Howard is just entering his prime. His best years are still ahead of him. The receiving core in Tampa is still loaded, but it's leaner in 2019 after the losses of Deshaun Jackson and Adam Humphries. In other words, I'm not worried about target share being an issue whatsoever. Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and O.J. Howard will all get theirs. The addition of offensive mastermind Bruce Arians at head coach is huge, and the Bucs could field one of the league's most prolific offenses as long as he's coaching in Tampa, and Howard will be a big part of that.
Yeah, they were like the 3rd best offense last year without Arians, so
yeah,
good possibility to go up.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I'm expecting big things this year.
Absolutely. So at number 6, we have Hunter Henry, and he's a guy who's dealt with his share of injuries early in his career. He tore his ACL in May last year, but I don't think there's any health concern at this point. He was able to return at the end of last year and is coming into the year 100% healthy. If you remember, he came back for the divisional round last year. I'm pretty high on Henry this year, and going forward, I think he has a lot of talent. He's still only 24 years old, filled with potential. In 2017, he was tight end 8 on a points per game basis, and that was still with Antonio Gates limiting some of his tight end targets. While injury may not be a concern for Henry anymore, the situation around him does prevent him from being higher up on this list. I think you have to be concerned about Mike Williams taking away some red zone opportunities from him and vulturing some touchdowns. And when projecting 3 years out, you have to take into account the age of Phillip Rivers. So a lot of upside with Henry, but I think his ceiling is a little limited.
So we like to do things on the fly. JJ is going through our show doc and now is putting our tight ends into tiers. So that was our very own tier 3. Does that sound good? And we'll jump into tier 4, which is at the 7th spot. Remember, you're looking at these tight ends on a 3-year window, and as you draft and think about that, remember you try to want to stay at the top of the tier. At our 4th tier, again, number 7, our consensus is TJ Hawkinson, a rookie of the Detroit Lions. Now, we all know Detroit doesn't use or barely uses their tight end, right? But why would you draft him where you did and then not use him? I think they've got a reason to use him now. Really, the question is to anyone that would not like him or go away from him is, why would you use that top 10 pick unless you're planning on it? 3 of the Lions' 6 target leaders, if you're thinking about this, are gone this year, leaving about a 30% target share. I know that TJ is not going to take all of that. That's pretty obvious. I've not really seen, and maybe you guys can ruminate on this while I'm kind of talking out loud here. I'm not sure that I know of a better situation, really, where you've got a young rookie, an opportunity. You see the talent of him where he slides into a role and can play and contribute right away. Detroit wanted a guy that can make plays after the catch. They saw Hawkinson do that in Iowa. Also, there are reports out of camp, and then also Kirk Ferentz has talked about in interviews that he's a great pass blocker. So I like him even more because the potential to actually stay on the field, run routes, and pass block, or just at least block, period, is astronomical to me. He's just a big buy. TJ Hawkinson at number 7.
Absolutely, Michael.
Yeah, there it is.
Coming in at number 8 is Austin Hooper. Austin Hooper is one of my favorite players. He's entering his 4th year. He's only 24 years old. And his best quality is his consistency. He is an okay receiver. He's only an average blocker. As a safety valve, he doesn't really break many big plays, but he is young, consistent, and in a great offense. Hooper will never be a threat to be a top 3 fantasy tight end. If that's what you're looking for, do not draft Austin Hooper. However, Hooper will provide a low-risk, low-end tight end 1 on your Dynasty roster for the next 3 years.
Moving along to number 9, we have Mark Andrews.
Dang, do we really?
Yeah, and I have Andrews as one of my breakout candidates for 2019. I know I talked about him on the pod before.
Right.
He's the only receiving threat in Baltimore that showed any chemistry with Lamar Jackson whatsoever last year. And Jackson, he wasn't even enough of a threat as a passer, as a rookie, to be considered pedestrian. He just wasn't very good, but Andrews didn't seem to be affected by that. So I think that bodes very well going forward. He finished as a tight end 17 in PPR as a rookie. He had 34 receptions, 552 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Rookie tight ends don't tend to fare so well, and so those are pretty respectable numbers. I'm predicting a top 12 finish for him in 2019, and he could even flirt with 1,000 yards, which would put him closer to the top 5. I think that he is going to be the go-to target in Baltimore, and he will be a solid tight end 1 option for at least the next 3 years. He's the number 16 tight end on Sleeper currently with an ADP of 151. That's the 13th round, and that's what I call a steal.
Ryan, very bullish there on Mark Andrews. And I'm going to talk about a guy here at number 10 who I am also very bullish on in fantasy and in real football, Dallas Goedert. So this is where I had him ranked. I had him ranked at number 10. And thinking about it, I might even move him up a little bit higher. Goddard is 6'5", 250, and watching him play, he looks a lot like Zach Ertz on the field. He's really good at getting open, and he's actually a little better than Ertz after the catch. He had a really nice rookie year last year, and every beat writer in Philly is talking up Dallas Goedert and the idea of the Eagles playing a lot of 12 personnel this year. Last year they led the NFL in 12 personnel, and I see that gap getting even bigger this year. And while I think Goddard does have some standalone value, if anything were to happen to Zach Ertz, I don't know about you guys, but I'd put him as a top 3 or 4 tight end in fantasy. So, I know we don't normally talk about tight end handcuffs in fantasy, but I think Goddard is a guy that has a lot of value.
All right. Well, we have the only tie in the tight end rankings now. And how do we settle ties on the Rider Dynasty pod?
We fight to the death.
With the duel or baby oil wrestling match. You're my boy, Blue! But with the little game we like to call opportunities and obstacles.
I was way off.
You were way off. Michael and Nick will face off to determine who is the better tight end for your Dynasty roster. Is it David Njoku or Noah Fant? Michael, the mic is yours.
Well, thank you, kind sir. I'm going to present an opportunity and obstacle for David Njoku. His opportunity, and while we know there's a lot of mouths to feed in Cleveland, Njoku is an athletic matchup nightmare, right? 22 years old, paired with another young quarterback. He was 7th in tight end targets last season, despite, again, a quarterback and a coaching change. He's the biggest player on the field at 6'4" in a high-powered offense. So, again, matchup, right? His obstacle is kind of tied into what I was talking about, is the competition. We know that Baker's not going to give every offensive player on the Browns a top 5 fantasy value as Twitter or Reddit or some people would have you believe. We're trying to stay grounded here, right? Beckham's the best, followed probably by Chubb, if you're thinking about the order of this. Maybe Jarvis Landry, a couple other wide receivers. What's going to happen when Kareem Hunt returns? I would say, again, at best, he's a 3, 4, or 5th option on the team. And maybe that's not something that I necessarily want to ride or dynasty with. So
see what you did there, Michael. Very nice.
Yeah. All right, Nick. Please don't be as corny, but you're up.
All right, I'll do my best. So I'm going to talk about Noah Fant, and I'm going to give an opportunity and an obstacle. So his opportunity, he's going to play right away in Denver. I know Michael was talking earlier about how TJ Hawkinson slots in really nicely in Detroit. I think the same thing applies here with Fant in Denver. And unlike Njoku, he doesn't have nearly as many offensive weapons to worry about taking up his target share. At this point in the rankings, you're trying to decide who has the most upside because they're all kind of shots in the dark. They're all a little bit unproven. Joe Flacco is his quarterback, and while, yes, I don't think Joe Flacco is very good, over the last 3 years, Joe Flacco has targeted a tight end on 23% of his passes, which is the 5th highest rate in the NFL during that span. Only Carson Wentz, Alex Smith, who's no longer in the league, Andrew Luck, and Marcus Mariota are higher. So that is the opportunity for Noah Fant. Now the obstacle. Ryan talked about this a little bit earlier. He's a rookie, right? The obstacle is that young tight ends usually don't come out of the gate as great fantasy producers. Guys like George Kittle, Zach Ertz, and O.J. Howard have a lot of promise now, and we love them now, but none of them had great rookie years. So that's going to be something that Fant is going to have to overcome.
All right, that was very good information from both of you. This is a very odd pairing for me. I'm not a huge fan of either player. Cecil Lammey, who is one of the football guys, has been talking about Noah Fant. He's at the Denver camp. He's a reporter out there and says that Fant isn't catching much and not looking great in camp. Based on that, with what Nick said, and the fact that Njoku is at least a competent blocker, I'm going to go with Njoku at 11 and Fant at 12.
What about you, Ryan?
I actually had Njoku as my lucky 13, but I think I'm moving him up in my rankings after hearing what Michael had to say.
It really comes down to me is has done it before, right? As Nick mentioned with Fant, so he could come out of the gates hot. Done it before, better offense, even though there's competition, better quarterback. I think again in a tie, I think that has to split it.
Yeah, I have to. Even though I did try to come to Noah Fant's defense, I do have to agree. Njoku's in his second year, right?
Yeah, this is his third.
Yeah, this will be his third.
And I appreciate everybody's feedback, but unfortunately, your opinions don't matter. I'm judging this one, so Njoku wins, and that rounds out our tier 5. So in tier 5, we had T.J. Hawkinson at 7. Austin the Average Hooper at 8. We had Mark Andrews at 9, Dallas Goedert at 10. 11 was David Njoku, and at 12, Noah Fant. Starting off tier 5, we have
Chris Herndon at 13. And actually, I was surprised to find that I'm the highest of the 4 of us on Herndon, considering I'm not the resident Jets fan. But, he finished as the tight end 16 in PPR formats last year, so that was one spot ahead of Mark Andrews. He scored at least 10 fantasy points in 5 games, and yes, while he's suspended to start this year 4 games, he'll be back week 6 against, I believe it's the Cowboys. Look at the chemistry Sam Darnold and Chris Herndon displayed down the stretch last season, and that was with both of them as rookies. And so they will continue to grow together and develop into a dangerous quarterback-tight end connection. And Herman, you can get him for a bargain right now, too. He's currently the number 14 tight end on Sleeper with an ADP around 144. So in a 12-team league, that's the 12th round. So, kind of like Andrews, that's another steal. And with that, we have our first Disparity Debate at 14. We have Eric Ebron here, which is interesting. Ebron, as we all know, had a breakout season with Indianapolis Colts last year, made a Pro Bowl. Michael, you have Eric Ebron up all the way up at 10, and JJ, you're not so high on Ebron, and you have him at 19.
Which is really interesting, is because that's a disparity of 9 places, which I don't know if it's that huge. I would say with Ebron, I've got him at 10. That's just because I like him better than some of the ones that we've got, in the teens. Everyone wants to talk about him being a high regression candidate, and I just want to be able to be at least the leveling voice that says that may be true, but it's it's not time to jump off ship. I will be adjusting these rankings. This is obviously a ranking of, Ryan, as you mentioned, if Andrew Luck is starting week 1, right? The pass catchers obviously being downgraded. I will say that, Colts putting 28% of their targets to tight ends. Ebron has shown he's a weapon. He's young. He's developed a rapport with Luck. I don't think that he'll get a 19%, touchdown rate like he did last year. But again, he, to me, in rankings is ahead of people like Fant, Goddard, Burton, Thomas, Cook, and again, Herndon in my rankings. So that's where I have him.
All right. And, I think, Michael, that the main disparity in our rankings is a direct reflection of our Jack Doyle ranking.
True.
Last year, in games where Ebron and Doyle were both healthy, Doyle played in twice as many snaps as Ebron. Pro Football Focus has Doyle with an overall grade of 72, which is higher than Ebron at 66.3. Doyle is the better football player. He is a better run blocker, and he's a better pass protector. Ebron may get some more red zone targets, but not enough to overcome playing half of the snaps as Doyle. That's why I have him rated so low.
Yeah, it makes absolute sense. I am, again, when I look at Ebron, as I mentioned, it's going to be hard to replicate what he did last year, but I think that people are afraid that come down to earth means little or next to nothing. And again, there's no guarantee that Jack Doyle's not going to have another injury. I'm not going to pick that, but Ebron, again, in his first year proved that he could play with Luck, and I'm gonna keep writing it until he shows me otherwise.
So are we now getting two turns to speak? Ryan, you're running this thing here. What's going on?
I split the middle between you guys. I have Eric Ebron at 13 in my rankings. I think I'm leaning a little more toward JJ here, just because I do like Jack Doyle, and I don't think that he's going to play double the snaps that Ebron does, but it might be pretty close to a split, and it's going to bring down the fantasy value of both players.
Are you happy? I got to talk twice, you got to talk once, and you still won.
I'm gonna rain on JJ's parade here, because that is something that I just love to do. I love to rain on JJ's parade. I'm gonna side with Michael here. He had him at number 10. I had him at 11, and I think, JJ, you talked about how the snap share goes with Doyle and Ebron, but I think the big difference there is him in the red zone. Andrew Luck loves tight ends in the red zone, and I just think Eric Ebron is such a mismatch there. And when it comes to these tight ends, I think you have to kind of look at who has the touchdown upside. Now, I don't think he's going to do what he did last year. That was insane. But I do think he is going to be a high touchdown guy. So I'm going to side with Michael on that one. And before JJ cuts me off, I'm going to go with number 15 here. We have Jared Cook. And Jared Cook finished as tight end 5 last year in PPR formats, and that was in Oakland. He signed a 2-year deal with the Saints this offseason. So there's a clear QB upgrade. While I think you'd be crazy to think that he's the next Jimmy Graham in New Orleans, it wouldn't surprise me if he continued to produce as a top 12 tight end for the duration of his contract. There are some things that are holding him back, though. Number one, we've been bitten by the New Orleans tight end hype before. If you guys remember Kobe Fleener, I don't know about you guys, but I fell for that one.
What about Josh Hill? Remember when Josh Hill was the hot off-season best ball signing?
I don't, but I'll take your word for it. Maybe I was too young for that one. So back to my list here. Number 2, Breeze is getting up there in age, and you don't know how long. I'm sorry, I'm still laughing at that last one. Oh, that's great, Josh Hill.
Keep going.
What a pull. Yeah, so look, Breeze is getting up there in age, and you don't know how long he's going to play. And number 3, the New Orleans running game and defense, we've seen that improve over the years. It's continued to improve, so the Saints aren't going to have to throw the ball like they did back when they had Jimmy Graham and, yes, Josh Hill. So there is reason for optimism, but there's still also reason to have some cause to pause with Jared Cook.
All right, at 16, we're looking at Ian Thomas. And Ian Thomas is really exciting to me kind of as a prospect. He averaged 12.3 PPR points per game in the last 5 weeks that he saw action. Saw at least 5 targets per game, including that blow-up game, which was 11 targets in week 14 versus Cleveland. Everyone's going to talk about Greg Olsen, right? Might cut into that opportunity in 2019. All of us are right around the same area of like a 15 or a 17 ranking, so clearly none of us really think that Greg Olsen's going to be too much of a problem for Ian Thomas, because the cream rises to the top here, and Greg Olsen is old. God. Also, can be an up and down producer, but I'm going to go this way and say I think that he could be, a next fantasy star. I am personally trying to buy as many shares as I possibly can right now while his stock is seemingly at its lowest with the return of Greg Olsen. I think people can kind of see through that a little bit and have been buying, but he's a definite buy or hold for me.
That's great. Now just go over the tier 5, because that finishes our tier 5 tight ends. At number 13, we had Chris Herndon. At number 14, we had Eric Ebron. At 15, we had Jared Cook. At 16, we had Ian Thomas. And at the start of tier 6, we have
Trey Burton. And he's coming off what is commonly called a sports hernia surgery. And just to be clear, that term really bugs me because it's not really a hernia. Okay, it's more of a general term for an injury to a muscle that inserts on this bone in your pelvic area called the pubic bone. The term core muscle injury is starting to become more popular, and it makes a little bit more sense. That area is considered your quote-unquote core. Last year, if you remember, Burton mysteriously missed the playoff game against the Eagles because of a groin injury. And, well, what people call the quote-unquote groin muscles are the muscles that attach on that pubic bone. So that's where that injury is coming from. And this type of injury is really tricky because the return to play can really vary. Just last year, in fact, Eagles wide receiver Matt Collins missed the entirety of last year with the same injury. Some players come back in just a few weeks. So it's very, very variable. It's just incredibly debilitating, and you'll hear athletes say that they almost lose their ability to generate power because all their power comes from their core. Burton has started to practice, but doesn't seem close to being cleared for contact yet. And until he is, I'm staying far away from Trey Burton.
I just saw some news come across the wire that Trey Burton did see increased time today after they had held him back in the preseason, and that during a team scrimmage, he hauled in a pair of touchdowns today. So that's definitely a sign in the right direction.
Yeah, and it depends. Was that team, sorry to put you on the spot here, was that a team scrimmage that was fully padded and he was cleared for contact, or was it just kind of a walk-through training camp kind of deal?
No, it wasn't a walkthrough. If it says scrimmage, that means full pads.
Okay. Yeah, so, like I said, it really depends on if he's cleared for contact, so maybe next week we'll update you on that one.
All right, moving along then to 18, we have Josh Oliver. Now, Oliver is a player I liked a lot during the draft process. I even wrote about him back in February as an underrated tight end prospect. He's coming out of a small school, San Jose State, and rookie tight ends typically need a year or so to adjust to the NFL. So I'm not expecting big numbers out of the 6'5", 250-pound former first-team All-Mountain West selection just yet. But Oliver is a very athletic player with good hands, route running ability, and he can block. So there's that, and I like his opportunity, as he has almost zero competition to become the starting tight end in Jacksonville. And Nick Foles loves his tight ends too. So Oliver might have some nice weeks in 2019, but I'm drafting Oliver because I like him a lot long term. And his ADP is currently around 256, so you can take a flyer on him late in drafts and just cash in when he does hit.
Yeah, and especially right now, Oliver is dealing with, I believe, a hamstring pointer. Actually, it's just a hamstring injury, and it is unclear if he's going to be available week 1 of the regular season. So absolutely, I think with that news especially, he might be slipping a little bit further down in drafts, Ryan. At number 19, we have my favorite guy, Jack Doyle. Doyle is a steal at 19. He is only 28 years old and is 1 year removed from getting 108 targets in this offense. He is the tight end with whom Reich and Luck are the most comfortable. When in crunch time, they trust him to do what is needed on the field. And that was shown in every game that he has ever played with Ebron last year and in previous seasons. Now, with the possibility of Brissett starting, that is also a plus because they had significant chemistry during the season that Luck missed with injury. Moving on to number 20 is Kyle Rudolph. Now, the Vikings wanted to get rid of Rudolph this offseason because they drafted Irv Smith. Then they watched Irv Smith in real life and said, hey, I think we should re-sign Rudolph. Now, is he exciting? No. Will he get targets? Yes. His contract is solid for the next 3 years, so I am confident that he will be on the Vikings for the foreseeable future. So expect him to be a mid-tier tight end 2 with a few tight end 1 weeks. He's not somebody you want to draft necessarily in a redraft league or in a non-tight end premium league, but he's a great second tight end for bye weeks or in the case of injury.
This is one of those that sometimes I always look back at our rankings as we compile and as we talk, and I'm like, why don't we have Kyle Rudolph higher? I think sometimes that the Irv Smith news, it gets in your head and it scares you away a little bit. But as JJ mentioned, it's tough when a team makes a commitment to you and signs you for a new contract. That should speak volumes in some way. So now we're looking at number 21, and we are talking more disparities with Vance McDonald. Chris Conte doesn't have a job thanks to this guy, one of the best NFL plays of last year, that stiff arm. Ryan, you've got Vance McDonald at 16 overall. JJ, you're coming in, at number 32 in his rankings. Ryan, would you start off with why you have Vance at 16?
Yes, if there's any tight end active right now who could have a late career breakout, it's McDonald. He's a physical, athletic player. You already mentioned the stiff arm. This guy's a freak athlete. It's been discussed ad nauseum, but Pittsburgh lost Antonio Brown, which frees up 168 targets. Juju Smith-Schuster will see some of those, but he already saw 166 last year, so it's fair to wonder how many more he's possibly going to get. James Washington's a bit of a wild card for me. Deontay Johnson will probably be good, but he's a rookie. Dante Moncrief, are any of you betting on him? No? Alright. And there's no more Jesse James either fighting for reps at the tight end position. So my bet is that McDonald, who saw 72 targets in 2018 and finished as the number 10 tight end in PPR, will be the largest beneficiary of Brown's vacated targets, and he could see in the ballpark of 100 targets. So, said that, my ranking of 16 seems a little low. However, I'm considering that McDonald is a 29-year-old tight end who has an extensive history of injuries and inconsistency. And JJ's laughing, so I would love to hear what you have to say.
Ryan, I love you. Sometimes you really make me smile. Vance McDonald is entering his 29-year-old season. I think we can count the number of 29-year-old breakouts on one hand and still have enough fingers left to let you know what I think of this pick. So Vance McDonald received the most targets of his career last year with 72. His previous high was 46. Ryan's prediction is that he can get upwards of 100 targets this year. So last year, he was only on the field for 428 pass plays, and for 25 of those, he blocked. So do we really think he is going to be targeted on 25% of his routes? Now, Mike Tomlin averages 76 targets to his tight end 1 per season. And the only reason it is that high is because of Heath Miller. In fact, since Heath retired, the tight end has only averaged 66 targets. And Vance McDonald is not Heath Miller. Now, McDonald's contract allows him to be cut after this season, saving the team $4 million. So let's see what happens. Now, he may have 1 year of production left, but I wouldn't bet on him holding value beyond 2019. And since we're doing a 3-year ranking, 1 out of 3 isn't very good for me, and that's why I had him so low.
I mean, that makes sense, JJ. I'm looking at the prospect of this year and then maybe next year on like a 1-year deal. I don't really see Pittsburgh having a whole lot, as backup. What is it? Xavier Grimble is the backup. We don't really know what's happening with Roethlisberger, but I could trust a Mason Rudolph or something like that throwing the tight end. I have Vance McDonald slotted kind of right in the middle of the two of you. So I agree with a lot of your points, but I'm going to go with his opportunity to have a prove it this year. If he gets cut, he gets cut. But I don't know that I can side with either one of you because I can't put Vance McDonald that high, but I don't know necessarily that I think that he's, in the 30 range. I kind of like him where I have, so I'm gonna call myself a winner on this one. Congratulations, Michael. Good job, Michael.
Jesus Christ! I don't even know how you live with yourself.
I love it.
Thank God your children.
So are we allowed to just grant ourselves victory now?
Crown ourselves? I don't know. I just did. Is anybody going to challenge it? Now I'm afraid because we're about to go into another disparity, and I'm up against Ryan with JJ. It's not going to go well for me.
Yeah, this has already been decided.
All right, so as Michael said, we now have our last disparity debate between the virtuous veteran, thank you for your service, Ryan, and the dastardly Denverian.
Yeah, what are we even called?
Denverites?
Oh, I don't like any of it. That doesn't sound good.
I'm going to go with Denverarian. Michael Kloss. Dawson Knox is a rookie tight end on the high-octane Buffalo Bills offense. First up is Ryan, who ranked Dawson at 15 overall.
All right, so Buffalo tight ends caught 55 passes for 520 yards last year. So it's not like the tight end isn't a part of the offense up there. And the thing is that all of them combined weren't as talented as Knox is. I said on a previous episode of the podcast that I see Dawson Knox as George Kittle light. They profile very similarly from a size and athletic standpoint. They're both very talented players who were severely underutilized in college, and they fell under the radar as a result. I'm not predicting a huge season in year 1 for Knox. Obviously, rookie tight ends, all that jazz. However, I am prioritizing getting Knox now while he's cheap. Because I think that he can have a year 2 breakout type of season. He gets a year of development in the NFL. He develops some rapport with Josh Allen, who can take steps to becoming a better quarterback. And I think a tight end like Dawson Knox can help that process along. So yeah, I mean, a future with Knox occupying the go-to role in Buffalo's passing offense isn't out of the realm of possibility. So, yeah, I have him coming at 15. I think that he has the goods to be taken that high.
All right. Great job by Ryan. Michael has Knox at 29. Spit your truth, brother.
Again, one of the things that is, when I look at video and try to stat a player out, or at least just understand and rank, I feel like I need enough of a sample size. right? Knox had 39 catches in 4 years at Ole Miss, like not in one season. Like that's 39 catches in all 4 years. So I feel like I'm a little bit behind the 8 ball on him, and to be able to what Ryan has done and gone forth to put him at 15 in the NFL based off that small sample size, like that's a hell of a call, to be completely honest. And that's not something that I even feel comfortable doing. So if that works out, like again, Ryan, we're going to be singing your praises forever, but that's not for me. I wanted to kind of make the dumb joke of just about Googling Josh Allen's completion percentage at 52%, couple that with the other target share that you've got to get from tight ends and wide receivers. Might have the opportunity there. Again, just I put those factors together. And again, I've said I like Josh Allen before. I like his opportunity to score fantasy points, but I just can't put Dawson Knox in again, a top 15, 16 without seeing more from him.
Well, okay, that was actually slightly interesting by Michael. Wow, I don't really know who to go with. I think what's holding me back on Dawson Knox, Ryan, is the fact that he has a pretty bad hamstring injury. He hasn't practiced really at all this preseason. I think he suffered the injury on day 3 of training camp and hasn't practiced since. So he has no real rhythm with Josh Allen. He hasn't practiced in the offense. So I'm looking at maybe he'll have 2 out of 3 good years, but I'm not really sure. And I know how Ryan loves to give out 1,000-yard seasons to everybody. Like literally, I'll make the joke a second time, like he's Oprah. You get 1,000 yards. You get 1,000 yards. Everyone gets 1,000 yards. But I'm gonna get some input from my consigliere, Nick Mirabito, on this one. Nick.
Yeah, so I'm going to be fully transparent here. I know a lot about injuries. I know a lot about anatomy. When it comes to young players, especially rookies and hamstring injuries, never great. I just had to Google Dawson Knox, so I'm going to go with Michael on that one. So, yeah, just being completely honest.
Yeah, just because you have to Google somebody that we all know doesn't necessarily make you right.
You asked for my opinion. I gave it to you.
You asked me to ask for your opinion.
Fantastic opinion, by the way.
Thank you.
So I have to go with the clear winner that both Nick and I agreed with, and it's Ryan.
Told you it was going to happen that way.
Yeah, and I disagree with Ryan 100%, and you're not winning anything, Michael. All right, so coming in at number 3 is Jace Sternberger. Little known fact, Jace is the son of Mary Steenburgen of Step Brothers fame. She played the mother. I don't know if you guys knew that.
No, I didn't.
Yeah, it's not true. They have 2 different last names, but they kind of sound alike, so.
You are the devil, sir.
Jace was drafted by Green Bay in the 3rd round of the 2019 draft. He's a solid receiver, but a poor blocker. He has average measurables. Jimmy Graham is the entrenched starter who is well liked by Rodgers, and we know how important that is on a Green Bay offense. For this reason, I don't see Jace getting many targets this year outside of a Graham injury. He may grow into a tight end 1 role, but I don't think that if we're looking at this 3-year window, so the next 3 years, maybe he'll be a tight end 1 for that next 3-year window. But I don't see him doing anything in this 3 years.
All right, I think it's a solid take. I'm not a really huge fan of Green Bay tight ends in general either. So we're going to wrap up our top 24 then with Irv Smith. JJ mentioned Kyle Rudolph's new contract earlier on number number 20. This situation reminds me of another one involving a boring veteran incumbent at tight end who signed a big contract only to see his team draft a talented rookie tight end out of Alabama. Of course, I'm referring to the O.J. Howard Cameron Brate situation in Tampa, and no one paid attention to Brate anymore. The same thing is going to happen to Rudolph. Smith is very young. He just turned 21 last week. It was either August 8th or 9th was his 21st birthday. So he's going to need a year to adjust to the speed of the NFL game. But much like Howard did his rookie year, I expect Smith to flash at some point this year. And I think that in year 2 is going to be his time to take over as the starting tight end in Minnesota. So he will be a very good starting player at some point in this 3-year window. And because of that, he comes in at 24th here on the wider Dynasty rankings, and he is 19th in my personal rankings.
So I'm going to ask you a question, and then I'm going to read off the rankings and let you think about my question. So the question to each of you is name one player that you think should have been ranked in the top 24 that we didn't. So I'm going to recap the tier 6 while those guys think. We've got Trey Burton at 17 in our tier 6, Josh Oliver at 18, Jack Doyle came in at 19, Kyle Rudolph was at 20, at 21, we had Vance McDonald. 22 was Dawson Knox. 23 was Jay Sternberger. And rounding in our top 24 was Irv Smith. So, Ryan, who do you think missed these rankings that should have been there?
I'm going to go ahead and say Mike Gesicki. He was a high draft pick for the Miami Dolphins last year. He didn't do much his rookie season, but year 2, new coach coming in, new scheme. I think that he could have some pretty high upside still, and you can get him on the cheap, and yeah, it's a safe investment, I think.
I think that would have been mine too. JJ, what are you thinking?
I'm thinking that Dwayne Allen is starting ahead of Gesicki right now, and that's why he wasn't in the top 24, because he can't even start over RoboCop. I think for me, I would have to say I would put Jimmy Graham up there. Jimmy Graham, I think, was in the top 3 running pass plays last year. So he is heavily involved in that offense. I mean, I don't obviously think he's a top. I have him ranked at 23, so bottom of tier 2. But I think he definitely has 2 years of use left. And I could definitely see him going somewhere, maybe like New England, and just being a pass catcher in the red zone after that. But I think Jimmy Graham has a lot of talent and, is a very solid player that we're overlooking.
And Nick, what can you share?
Yeah, look, Jimmy Graham was going to be my answer, so now I had to look down the list here. And honestly, I think it really comes down to how you view the tight end position and kind of what your thought process is as you go into it. We can rank some of these young guys higher, but on a year-to-year basis, things change so much in the NFL. So I look at some other guys here. I know they might not have long-term high rankings, but guys like Delaney Walker being a safety net to Marcus Mariota, Jordan Reed maybe being okay for a couple of games, Greg Olsen. Now, again, none of these guys I would say would crack the top 24, but if you're in a pinch, I think those are some guys that you could kind of look at on a week-to-week basis.
Yeah, Nick, one thing that I did, because I was getting into some debates with this, is as I was ranking them, I had all the names, and I looked at each one and thought, how many seasons do I see these guys producing at a tight end 1 level? If I saw 1, 2, or 3. And then from there, that's how I sort of adjusted them. Some of these guys I don't think will ever see tight end 1 production. And I think that we all get excited over rookies, but rookies flame out. So I think out of Hawkinson, Fant, Oliver, Knox, Sternberger, Smith, Waring's on our list, Foster Moreau, probably only 2 of those guys are going to end up any good. I mean, the hit rate on tight ends is very low. Go back the past 5 years and look at who the hot rookie tight ends were. And for the most part, they're not around or they're barely hanging on to rosters. So I think, like Nick said, tight end is a very, very, it's a position that fluctuates a lot in value.
I think that's the perfect note to end on with that wisdom from JJ. That is going to do it for us, this edition of the Reiner Dynasty podcast. Don't forget to give us a shout on Twitter. We will see you next week. We're going to say have a great night and send us out, guys.
See ya.
Catch you in the next one.
Boat drinks.
Good night.
Thank you for listening to the Ride or Dynasty podcast. If you have enjoyed the pod, please subscribe and leave us a rating and review on iTunes. Follow the guys on Twitter at Ride or Dynasty. You can follow JJ at JJ Wenner. Ryan is at BixPixFFB. And Michael is at Michael S. Kloss. Check out our website, rideordynasty.com. And remember, we have your back.
Your reputation far exceeds your skills, Mammy.